Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back again with a bit of a market update, the highlights from GDT event 369, and of course, chat of the week.
Okay, pretty brisk this week. Some market updates. Joe, start us off in Europe.
Yeah, look, spot butter prices are starting to tumble. We've kind of been expecting this to come. Spot milk prices are still quite high, but we're just seeing those butter prices start to come under a bit of pressure. Still some pre-Christmas cover, but interesting results in the GDT as well for butter this week.
Futures have been weakening in Europe at a faster pace. The March contract lost 5% last week, and when we go back several weeks, we're kind of losing between 8 and 9% in the Q1 contracts. Just how far it's going to fall is the most interesting thing from here, and that's got a lot to do with how quickly milk picks up and whether or not we see some alleviation of that tension. But it isn't dropping fast yet, and we still see some production difficulties in the week-to-week numbers. But cream's still up there above 10 euros a kilo. It's just how quickly that falls now. Surely most Christmas business is done, but you never know.
Yeah, and just looking at skim milk powder, it's drifting a little bit weaker. Some of those stories about Asian demand coming back are starting to be a bit thinner on the ground, Steve. So maybe running out of a bit of puff. Prices are still quite elevated, so the affordability issues are still going to be there for some of those markets.
Yeah. And look, the other thing to call out, I think, is interesting when we went across the regions and into the various things moving, that US butter has picked back up again. And what's behind this? There's been a high volume of hedging activity. Our colleagues in the US have been watching this closely, seeing this, dealing in some of the transactions, that there's a lot of hedging going on to basically lock in what are pretty attractive prices looking forward. So historically, this is good buying for users.
That's right.
Okay, looking at GDT, quite a bit to talk about on this page. The overall result up 1.2%, which is pretty odd given there's a lot of down bars there, right? But it's the weight of that whole milk powder trade that lifts the overall average. It went up 4%. Skim milk powder drifted weaker, consistent with what you just talked about, Joe. $20 below last week's pulse. And just in the background, something that's relevant here when we look at fat. Butter volumes on the event were lifted 23% last week. AMF was lifted 21%. So that's a surprise to participants. And naturally, butter went down nearly 5%. New Zealand butter lost that on average across the second to fourth contract. AMF was pretty mild, and it trimmed some of those short-term high prices we've seen. In behind the butter result, pretty dramatic fall for European product. We'll come on to that in a bit. Cheddar lost 3%. So plenty of action there, Joe.
Yeah, and we can just see with that demand-supply ratio there, Steve, pretty much down for everything, but butter is a real standout there, much lower demand, and the result was in the price.
When you think about that AMF volume increase, that the fact that demand was right up there at near average is actually quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Whole milk powder was the strongest of products. Clearly, it's about the only one that went up 4%. You can see that's pretty strong gains. We're touching above 4,000 in that last contract. And just where we are in the season, I thought I'd throw this one in, Joe, just to show, we're certainly off the peak and we're on that downward incline. Still well above last year, these volumes on the event, on the auction platform. But we'd expect buying volumes to be falling with that in the background.
Sure.
But China didn't.
Yeah, look, in terms of China's involvement, remained above the 10,000 tonne mark for this event. That's almost 60% of sales from this event. Southeast Asia buyers backed off, and the Middle East also took a little bit less. But, some not the highest volume from China, but still right up there, Steve.
Yeah, the skimmer powder slipped, small decline, $20 below last week's pulse. Still a premium to the EU product. Premium is nearly $200 still. It's quite a healthy number. And when we look into the background with skim milk powder trade, China took a smaller volume, the smallest in 6 events, still half the tonnage that was purchased. We're still, reasonably elevated volumes compared to the last couple of years. So it's encouraging.
Yeah, and just looking across to what the futures markets are doing, NZX futures are still quite strong compared to these results in this latest event. Higher premium over the US and the EU for New Zealand product there. Much greater faith than GDT buyers at the moment in terms of skim milk powder, Steve.
Yeah, still. So butter is almost a dead flat curve with a little kick at the end. But that's, as we've seen come off, basically, reverse some of the gains from last year when you look out a bit further. So that event was pretty interesting with higher volumes offered. And when you compare the New Zealand's firmer, in terms of futures, the EU's lost some ground, and EU butter fell 10% through this event. So we've actually rubbed out that advantage that New Zealand had. This chart includes the effect of those tariffs, so there's virtually nothing in it anymore. When we look down the track.
That window has closed.
Yeah.
And just looking at what the changes in the value of skim milk powder and butterfat have done to this synthetic whole milk powder price, the stronger whole milk powder price really means that discount is again pretty much evaporated, Steve. The whole milk powder cost advantage has narrowed to its lowest versus EU skim milk powder and AMF since February 24. And just looking across to there's European mozzarella, obviously, that's offered on the GDT platform. It fell 4.5% to just above $4,100 a tonne. Only Belgian product offered, obviously. That's equivalent to about 3,920 euros a tonne, or about $1.87 per pound, Steve. So that's at least 100 euros a tonne below recent EU trades, and the official prices that we see quoted out of the EU are still well above this. So it looks like a bit of a downward track for mozzarella prices, Steve.
Yeah, so there's got to be some demand side pressure there below the theoretical value, and what we compare here is what's the fair value based on fat and protein values in Europe, which is the black line, compared to where CME cheese is. And essentially the trades we're seeing, including GDT, are occurring well below that black line. So there's some pushback on demand, we think, that's underway. And when you look at it in US dollar terms, that's got to be making some of the US exporters feel a little bit anxious as to what's the competitive price against European mozzarella, given there's likely to be downward pressure on butter from here on.
Sure.
What have you got for chart of the week, Jo?
Yeah, look, chat of the week, we're across to the US, Steve, and just looking at what's happening with forward margins on farm for US farmers. Pretty good with milk futures and low feed costs in prospect that you can just see on that chart. The weaker cheese market, though, below futures, as we project, could impact this moving into 2025, which, as we keep saying, we're going to see a lot of cheese capacity coming online, a lot of pressure on the cheese market. So there's a short-term opportunity there, Steve, to lock in some margin.
Definitely for producers, and we hear that's the go at the moment in the US producer land. The situation will change, but that's a really interesting take. That's all from us, but we're going to have a special sign-off. We've got a special little person here with us this afternoon while we shoot this video who's going to come and say goodbye with us to our viewers. She's just perhaps a fraction shy.
Oh, you're going to put your mask on?
She's going to put a mask on. And anytime
come
soon.
Over here, darling, between Nanny and Poppy.
And so, Sophie, what we say is...
Bye. So thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
And see you next week.
See you next week.
Oh,
Did you look at the camera? Or did you
great job. Were you looking at the camera?